Welcome to Great Taste. I'm your host, Steve Boss. 60 minutes of deliciousness upcoming. Last spring, actually, I had one of the co-executive directors of the Real Organic Project as a guest on the show, Lindley Dixon. And I'm thrilled to welcome the other co-executive director of the Real Organic Project, Dave Chapman, to our show. Dave and Lindley are essentially carrying the torch for organic certification, but organic certification with a little extra to it, which we're going to learn more about. And in that organization of the Real Organic Projects organization, there are now over 1,000 farms that are members that have this certification of Real Organic. All of their inspectors that they have in the field have been farmers at one point or another in their careers, and there is no cost to get this certification added on to your USDA organic certification if you are a farmer and apply for it and qualify. So Dave, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Steve. And I would say there's no cost to the farmer. It certainly does cost some money, so that's why we need support from many people. But that's right, it's free to the farms.
Perfect.
As it should be.
So let's there are so many issues that I really would like to try to help as best we can in a short time that we have clarify the landscape for consumers because it's extremely complicated. I mean, I feel like I know a little bit more than maybe most people, and I'm still confused about so many different things. So why don't we start out with one of the hot topics that has been around for a while now and is continuing to cause more and more concern, and that is the whole hydroponics being categorized as organic by the USDA. And I have an example that I ran into recently, and I want to make sure that I'm correct. I was at my local co-op and I bought some cherry tomatoes that were certified organic from Wholesome Family Farms. And boy, they were beautiful and they just look great. And then I had this thought, I wonder if these guys are raising these in soil. I mean, they're in, warmer climate than I am in the Midwest, or if it's hydroponic. And to tell you the truth, maybe I didn't read carefully enough, but it never really said directly on their website that I could see that they were hydroponically grown, but it was quite obvious to me that they were grown in an element that wasn't soil. So I thought that was a little strange, and I want to make sure I'm interpreting it correctly. And I'd like you to just give us some understanding of this whole thing of how hydroponic, which is non-soil grown products, can be called organic when in the USDA organic regulations, it clearly states that these products have to be grown in a soil environment.
Yeah. Well, let me start by saying if you're not confused, you're not paying attention. So we would have to be confused because there are a lot of professionals, very talented marketing people, confusing us on purpose, and they're good at their jobs. That website you talked about is a perfect example. I know them, and they were involved in the battle with the USDA to actually allow hydroponic into organic certification. And even though they fought so hard for it, when asked by National Public Radio if they grew things hydroponically, they said, no, we don't. So it's just about changing the meaning of words. And that's what we're dealing with. Just maybe, Stephen, if I could just start with saying, because it's a common question, if people understand what hydroponic is where you provide all the nutrition for the plant in the liquid feed. And it gets nothing basically from the medium that its roots are in. And sometimes the roots are in water, sometimes they're in air, and they're just misting. And sometimes they're in a block of shredded coconut husk that kind of looks like compost, but it isn't. And it's biologically devoid of nutrition. And in all those cases, you just give all the food as a liquid feed. And a good question is, well, wait a minute. If that liquid feed is allowed in organic production, why isn't that organic? And I would say that to understand what organic means, organic in its essence is not about the absence of pesticides, although that is one of the benefits, one of the many benefits. But organic, when it was actually created, was really before the pesticide revolution, which started right after World War II. And organic was already going as a movement, and it was in response to the use of chemical fertilizers. And chemical fertilizers were like this miracle drug, great deal like a drug. And if you used this miracle drug, your yields went up right away. And what farmer doesn't like that? And your income went up right away. It was kind of a wonder drug. It was like the wonder bread of agriculture. The problem was there were a lot of side effects, and over time, those great yields started to go down. And what went up after a little while was insects and diseases and weeds, as it turns out. So that was okay. Chemical industry had solutions for everything. So they could handle the insects with pesticides, and they could handle the diseases with fungicides, and they could handle the weeds with herbicides. And so I just read yesterday that right now, I think it's 1 pound of pesticides for every human on the planet is being used every year. Unbelievable. And but even if the place I read was wrong, it's a lot, and it's not going down, it's going up. So our whole system is ratcheting up to use more and more chemistry in order to produce food. The traditional slogan of organic is feed the soil, not the plant. And the idea being that a plant derives true health and nutrition from a diet that we can't begin to even understand, right? We just aren't smart enough to know really what does the plant need. We can get the major elements right, we can get the minerals right, but there's a lot of stuff in the soil that is a form of nourishment for the plant, and we don't understand it. We don't even have names for most of it. We know there are about 40,000 secondary plant metabolites. And a secondary metabolite means the plant won't die as soon as you take it away, but it does impact the health. And we could say sort of like our gut microbiome, which now we've come to understand that better in a popular culture. I get it. I have all these creatures living inside me that don't have my DNA, and I'm really in a world of hurt without them. You take away all those microbes that don't have Dave Chapman's DNA, and Dave Chapman will cease to exist. So as it turns out, we just ourselves are not individuals, we are communities. And so we start to think about that, we start to understand what organic agriculture is. Organic agriculture respects that plants and animals and soil are all part of a community, interdependent and relying on each other. And in that soil, it's tremendously diverse. And frankly, the more diverse, the better. If you want a healthy soil, it's got to have a lot of microbial diversity, and not just microbes, also, soil animals from very, very, very tiny to fairly large. There are all these things in there, and they're part of an interdependent system. So I'm giving you a very long answer to your very short question, but I think to understand why hydroponic wouldn't be organic, hydroponic is the epitome of chemical agriculture. Hydroponics says, feed the plant, not the soil. In fact, let's get rid of the soil. So an organic grower is going to do all these things to create health in the soil, which means basically providing a lot of food source for all those microbes, which is basically organic matter. And that's how it got to be called organic farming. It also has been called humus farming and biological farming. But in America, it's become known now as organic farming. So real organic farming has got to be about the soil health. And interestingly, the law that created the National Organic Program got that. It understood it very well. The people who wrote that law were very sophisticated practitioners who understood what organic meant. And they did an amazing job of laying it out as a law. Who knew that you could write such a good law? The problem is the law is not being enforced. So, okay, so now let's go back to our friends at Wholesome. And are they hydroponic? Well, yes, they are. I can show you lots of pictures of their place. It's classic, typical hydroponic. It's so hydroponic, you literally couldn't tell whether it was conventional hydroponic or so-called organic hydroponic. And they're good growers. They know what they're doing. They're excellent marketers. They're nice people, right? So we don't need to vilify them, except to say they're not telling the truth. They're not telling the truth to their customers, right? They're not lying to the USDA. The USDA allows what they're doing, right? But they're not telling the truth to you or me on their website. And if you write them a letter, you'll get the same answer. No, we're not hydroponic. I think now they probably have amended to say we're container growers. But what they mean is hydroponic. All of the nutrition is supplied as a liquid feed.
And I would, please don't let me speak for you, but I want to ask you,
Yeah.
You're the Real Organic Project and Organic Farmers Beef isn't really with hydroponic growers as such.
No.
It's because of the fact that the USDA has allowed hydroponic to co-opt the term organic, when by the very words of the law, as you already mentioned it, the regulations, it's not allowed.
It's not allowed. So, you know, organic, even before the USDA got involved at all, before there was a law, organic existed as a world movement. And it existed as a movement to create or recreate a genuine alternative to modern industrial chemical agriculture. And I think that there were movements, there were already reactions to chemical agriculture as early as, you know, the early 1900s, because we already started to see some chemical fertilizers coming in and some not chemical fertilizers like bat guano, right? Which they were mining off of island and bringing it, and it's like magical. Now you didn't have to take care of the soil, so we thought. Now you didn't have to grow cover crops to provide the nutrition for the following crop. Now you didn't have to manage animal manures and compost it in order to provide that, keep those cycles going, those cycles. And I saw a really interesting thing about George Washington Carver, who was a famous ecologist in the early 1900s. And he was already doing everything he could to promote an agriculture that was not in name, because we hadn't come up with that name, but it was in every way a practice of organic farming. And he wasn't alone. All over the world, there were people going, no, no, that's not the way. This is the way. And probably by the 1930s, it was really becoming organized. And by 1940s, during World War II, it was being called organic agriculture. And it was coming out of Europe as a movement. But the lessons that one of the founders, certainly Albert Howard, right, and who wrote a famous book called My Agricultural Testament. He wrote another one called Soil and Health, because he's trying to draw the links strongly between healthy soil and healthy humans, right? So, and it wasn't just about avoiding poison, which is, of course, you know, who wants a teaspoon of poison on their breakfast cereal? Nobody. So, but it wasn't just that. It was like, if you left out the poison, what about that cereal? Is it nutritious? Is it nourishing? Or is it not? And we've seen some reports say that you might as well eat the cardboard box that the cereal came in as well as the cereal for the amount of nutrition you're getting. So that's where this movement came from. When it hit America, something really got added, which was, you know, it exploded really during the Vietnam War, and it became a social movement. It wasn't just an agricultural movement. It was about the relationship of people to corporations. And that was a key element of out of all of that turmoil and struggle around Vietnam. And, you know, I think no family was untouched by that, no matter what your opinions were of anything. It was a time of tremendous tumult and change and questioning. And there was questioning about gender identity. There's a question about racial identity. There's a question about everything that we had kind of taken for granted. One of my friends put it beautifully. He said, you know, we discovered he was of an age of being drafted. He didn't get drafted because he already been in the army, you know, before Vietnam. And he said, what we discovered as we were protesting and fighting about this, because we didn't think it was the right war to be in, we discovered that the government was lying to us. They were lying to us about Vietnam, about these things. And then we discovered they were lying to us about a lot of things. And so out of that deep questioning, I think it was a deep questioning, agriculture was part of the questioning, and there was this spontaneous growth. It was not to address a market need. It was not a niche. It was not like, oh, if I just go organic, I'm going to make more money. Early organic farmers didn't make any money. There was no market. They're doing it out of a belief that this was the right way to go, that this was what made you healthy. I was just listening to a really interesting scientist, and he was talking about how science tries to figure out what nutrition is and should be. He said it's almost impossible. You know, these tests, what are you going to get? Like, are you going to get 100,000 people to stop drinking coffee for the next 10 years and another 100,000 to start drinking coffee so you can rule out just kind of lifestyle choices? He said, we can't do it. We can't run these tests. We can't fund one for 10 years anyway, but we can't get people to say, I'm only going to eat this diet. So it's very hard to prove the things that I'm saying. It's also very hard to disprove the things that I'm saying. But I got into organic as a young man in the 70s as a farmer. I had actually grown up on a farm, but I didn't know anything about growing vegetables. I grew up on a dairy farm. And I was very excited about it. I was excited about the community that was gathering around it. And I was excited about the idea that the food we ate had such a big impact on our health and on our democracy. It hadn't occurred to us yet, and on our environment, but we hadn't occurred to us yet that it had an impact on our climate. Nobody was talking about that I knew back then. But I believe that it's true, that it's all of these things about our health, our environment, our climate, our democracy. And these are all things that are dear to all of us. I mean, nobody wants to live next to a CAFO or a chemical plant. Nobody does. Nobody says, oh, great, there's a really cheap house here next to where they put in this huge industrial CAFO where you can't even breathe the air. So nobody wants to live there, and only people who have no choice end up there. And I would say that most people have a choice, would like to eat food that makes them healthy. Not everyone is able to make that choice financially or with access. And maybe there are other reasons why people can't seem to make that choice, even if they have the money and they have access to the good food, but you know, they end up at the at the McDonald's, right? Or whatever, because that just happens to be the food they like. But nonetheless, I think that an awful lot of people go to the store, they want to make the right choice, like you did, and they go, great, here's some organic tomatoes. They look beautiful. And guess what? They're pretty affordable. They're pretty inexpensive, relatively speaking. They're more than the others, but I'm willing to pay it because that's what I want. The problem is, and the reason the Real Organic Project exists, is that the USDA label is no longer something that you can fully trust to get the right answer. I want to say I will always, if I don't know the farms or if I'm in a strange store, I will always buy certified organic over conventional, always. I would even buy Wholesome Harvest over a conventional tomato. It's better. But is it as good as a long wind tomato? Not even close. in my opinion, and in the opinion of thousands of customers and millions of people across the country. So our problem, our challenge is one of education and awareness and finding out how we can find each other. When I was young, I was part of a food co-op, different from the co-ops now, which are like supermarkets. But this co-op was, we went to somebody's garage every week or two, and we had a bunch of food we got in bulk. And I remember chopping up the cheese and wrapping it, and we would, dole out the olives. And because we couldn't get the food we wanted in the supermarket. And it was a great example of people coming together to get what they wanted. And in the process, coming closer together as a community. It just builds a community. You go and you're cutting up the cheese together. And it's a pain in the butt, to go and if you're really busy, you have a busy job, it's not an easy thing to make that commitment, but there was something wonderful about it. And those food buying clubs evolved into small stores, and some of them evolved into bigger stores, which is wonderful. And those same stores now, those same co-ops often will carry Wholesome Harvest as the organic tomato, and they don't know that it's not soil grown. How would they? And that's the problem. That's why I say, if you're not confused, you're not paying attention. This is complicated. I'll say one more thing and then I'll shut up. If you go to the dairy case and you see all these milks, conventional and organic, and they all got a happy cow in the pasture on the cover, right? There's the picture. You go, that's what I want. I want the happy cow in the pasture, right? And I don't know what the percentage is, but I'm guessing it's a very small percent of that milk that actually comes from happy cows in pastures. So they're lying in their marketing. They know what we want. They know how to pluck our heartstrings, and we have to be incredibly astute or just surrender. Say, okay, whatever. Give me the bad milk. And is it bad milk? Yes. Is there a difference? Yes. They can prove that clearly. Is it different for your health? Yes. Right? So, but how do I get the milk I want? That's not so simple. And some of that, I would say probably over half of the certified organic milk comes from a confinement CAFO now. For eggs, it's much higher. Probably over 80% of the eggs certified organic eggs come from a confinement warehouse, factory. I don't know what you call those huge chicken CAFOs. They're huge. And they're not what anybody means by organic, except the people who own that and their mothers, right? Nobody else thinks that's organic. Oh, and the people in Congress whom they control, which is unfortunately true. It's like, and not just people in the House of Representatives, senators too, because there's a great accumulation of money there. They have a lot of power. They have a lot of money that they make because they're so big, and then they use that very strategically to impact the laws and the regulations and the enforcement. So that's what we're up against.
Well, you know what I get from all this is that, okay, if I, as a consumer, can have somebody like Dave Chapman helping me understand the roadmap, then I can make educated choices about where I want to spend my money. So that's what I'm looking for as we continue this discussion, because it's going to get even more complicated, I think, when we go to the next issue, which is labeling. But before we get there, I just want to add two other things. One, you were talking about how there are a lot of things that can't be proven because they're actually so far beyond nutrition science as it is today, we'll say. But I do want to mention that there are things that have become clearer and clearer over the last few years, which really speak to some of the points that you've made. And all anyone needs to do if they want to just find the essence of that is read the book What Your Food Ate by David Montgomery and Ann Bickley, because it will make it very clear to you that there is an intimate connection that's being uncovered more and more daily by scientists, by nutrition experts, by farmers, in terms of the relationship between the soil microbiome, and I want to emphasize that, the soil microbiome, and the human gut microbiome. So I leave it to all of our viewers and listeners to check that out, but I think that it speaks to some of the things that you've already mentioned. And I want to move into, well, I want to say one last thing about hydroponic, because if people want to learn more about that, I think it's also one other point is that some of the same types of activity that we saw grow over the decades in the use of chemical agriculture and what its repercussions have been and continue to be on the soil and on the climate are now actually part of the whole process of hydroponic agriculture, doing the same type of activity again, we'll say, in terms of having disastrous effects on not only the soil, the climate, but also the economy of farmers who are still working with the soil. But I'll leave it at that, because we could spend hours, and you, of course, know much more than I do, and we could, I know, spend hours and days talking about all this. But go ahead. I think you
just throw one thing out for that, Steve. Absolutely, it doesn't just impact farmers, real organic farmers who are growing the soil. It's often putting them out of business, and then all of that learning and knowledge is lost, right? It's just lost. But I'm reading a book right now about basically the green revolution hitting Mexico. And just to say, it's not good for the people in Mexico or Peru either. You know, what they do is they end up paying incredibly low wages under terrible and stressful conditions for people to produce those blueberries that are certified as organic often, and that people put in their cereal every day. And I love blueberries too. I mean, I really love blueberries, but I only get real organic ones because I won't support that. But just to say, it's not like, well, let's just share the wealth with some of the rest of the world. Yes, but let's make sure that the people who are doing it are treating people to the same standards that we would expect of somebody working in America. And the reason that these companies go to Mexico over California is because they can pay $1 a day instead of, $1 an hour instead of $15 an hour. So there is a social justice component to this too. Hydroponics got certified. It was not because of somebody on a rooftop in Brooklyn. That is not why. It wasn't even because of Wholesome. They fought real hard for it. It was because of Driscoll's. It was because of multinationals who said, we want this. And guess what? The head of Driscoll's can talk to Tom Vilsack anytime they want. I cannot, right? And he'll listen carefully to what that person says. So, we just have to understand that this is not, and at first I thought it was just, one company is doing this and somebody's not paying attention at the USDA. Somebody was paying attention at the USDA. They just weren't paying attention to things I wanted them to pay attention to. Okay.
All right. Well, let's go on to labels, because as a consumer, and I'm certain viewers, listeners all come up against this when they go to the store, and they find just a plethora of labels that seems to continue to be, they're birthing each other. It seems like there's no birth control in terms of labels. And we have climate smart, pasture raised, grass fed, upcycled, fair trade sustainability alliance, non-GMO, certified regenerative by AGW, regenerative organic certified. I mean, real organic, USDA organic. It's a without having to spend, an inordinate amount of time. Is there some kind of broad brush stroke that you can give us to allow? I mean, I'll give you an example. For me, it's like, I don't know. I get confused. I'm glad that you gave me a pass when you said if you're not confused, then you're not you're
Not paying attention.
not
Yeah.
being good. So I appreciate that because when I start to see, it's like, am I supposed to be buying pasture raised or grass fed? It's like I don't even know anymore. Sometimes when I go to the store, I look for a real organic, of course, because then I'm not even concerned. But other than that, I'm totally confused sometimes.
Well, and unfortunately, you can't trust what the label says. Grass-fed, cage-free, you know. What does that mean to the person who made that label? Some of them are very good and some of them aren't. So, okay, here's what I would say is like everything in our life, our food system is going to be more fragmented. I wish it was more fragmented, honestly, because I see at the same time that there's this great fragmentation of concern, I see that there's this great narrowing of control into a handful of companies. It's for real. Four food companies, four meat companies control like 80% of the meat in America. It's just amazing. And the supermarkets are not much more diverse. They keep being bought up by this multinational or that multinational. So we have two things going on. One is the internet and everything being fractured and fragmented, and people can maybe find what they want, and at the same time, our choices are actually being limited in the mass market. So what does that mean? First, let me say, let's embrace confusion. And I don't hear that many people rage about the large number of choices they have in craft beer. Craft beer is now 50% of the beer market, and it was, I don't know what, 7 or 8% 10 years ago. So it has exploded. And you go into the craft beer section in the supermarket, and if you're not a beer drinker, you really lost. You go, oh my God, I don't know, but this one looks kind of fun, so I'm going to try that one. And that's just greater choice. And in the craft beer, most of it, or a great deal of it, really is small microbreweries. It's pretty cool. And again, this is an example that, of course, that can happen. Of course, the world can be different. We don't have to have only one berry company control 50% of the berry market in America, which is how it is now, right? Or 70% of the organic berries in America, which is how it is now. We can have many, many berry companies, but we're going to have to work for it to some degree. If you want to eat well, you're either going to have to do an awful lot of research, or you're going to have to do at least enough research to find out what curators do you trust. Real Organic Project is a curator. That's what a certification is. We visit every farm that we certify. They fill out an annual questionnaire to see if anything's changed. And we try to evaluate whether we think that they're telling the truth. And I will say we're very selective. We turn down about 15% of the farms that apply, which makes me sad. I wish we could take them all. And often the farms we turn down are great farms. We're not judging them. We're just saying, well, these are our standards right now. I'm sorry, but in this place, you don't meet it. And our standards are tough. But, it doesn't mean that you're, Jesus walking on the water just because you got certified by us. They're just farms, but they're farms that are doing the right thing. And we think that they represent what people want. We think our standards represent what people mean when they say, I want to buy organic. There are other certifiers out there. There are other labels. Some of them are very trustworthy and some of them are very untrustworthy. And it's not going to be simple. Let me give one example. Fair trade. Fair Trade USA. What's the difference? The labels look almost identical. Is there a difference? Yes, there is. Pretty big difference. Fair trade was intended basically to help protect peasants. Fair Trade USA was created by corporations to help protect corporations. And they said, guess what, guys? We're not getting a free ride anymore about the way we treat workers. So we better create a standard that we like and that we can live with. And I'm not saying it isn't better than nothing. I don't know. But I will say that they purposely made it confusing with the existing fair trade label. That's just the world we live in. We can curse the darkness or we can light a candle. And I think it's time to light a lot of candles. So yeah, real organic is an excellent one, but there are others. And you know, if you don't care about organic, that's fine. You know, you should be able to get the food you want. Then you have to find, well, what's the label I do trust? Or if you can't find real organic in your market, because a lot of our farms are very small and they don't even make it to market, then you're going to have to either ask the farms to get certified, or you're going to have to find some other way of identifying them. Of course, the best thing is to know your farmer, to know your neighbor, and even better is to grow it yourself. But you know your farmer and get to know what they do and ask them. That's beautiful. But in our complex society, often we don't know our farmer and we can't know our farmer. So we have to find ways of deciding, what do I want to put in my body and what do I want to support in the rest of the world? Because it's very important what you support in the food you eat. Food is a big deal. When I was young, I thought food was kind of boring. You know, it's like, oh, well, whatever, food, right? Now it's like, oh, this is pretty cool. I asked Michael Pollan, I got to interview Michael a couple of times. I asked him once, Michael, since you wrote Omnivore's Dilemma 15 years ago, have things gotten better or worse? Because I'm confused about that. And he said, well, in the awareness of the public, things have gotten much better. There's so much more excitement about food and food systems and farming. And there's so much more awareness that we just don't want food just grown in this industrial way. But in the food system itself, it's gotten worse. There's more concentration of power and capital, and there's more pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, insecticides being used. So the agriculture is getting worse in general, and people care about it more. So this seems to me like a recipe for moving towards solutions.
So in relation to that, one of the biggest buzzwords to come out of being championed by the media for the last maybe 5-6 years, maybe a little bit longer, but certainly ongoing in strength right now, is the term regenerative.
Yeah.
If my understanding is correct, this term has been, one might say it's been co-opted by the same groups that you've been talking about, these multinational concerns that have tremendous political power and economic clout. Is that a fair assessment? And does that mean that we as consumers need to be wary when we see that term? Because it's concerning to me simply because, well, one of the reasons, not simply because there are companies that are hanging their hat on that term that I trust, like Patagonia and Dr. Bronner's and Rodale, who have their own certification, regenerative organic certified, which applies to more than food, applies to textiles and to household products, that type of thing also. So I'm wondering about that term. How do we as consumers approach the use of that term?
With extreme caution. And regenerative organic certification is great. Those are wonderful companies. And you'll notice that it's regenerative organic. So they're saying it can't be regenerative unless it's organic. Their standards and ours are very similar in terms of what happens in the field. Theirs are stronger than ours on worker welfare. But in terms of animal welfare, in terms of soil health, essentially there's no different. When we started, they were different because they were really committed to no-till as a principle. And I think they realized that there were no farmers there with them. So they evolved. That's good. They evolved and they moved towards our standards. We're all friends. They're doing good work. But if you're not regenerative organic, if you're just regenerative, What does that mean? And the answer is it means very different things to very different people. It's there is no agreed upon definition. Now, the regenerative pioneers will say, we know what we mean. This is exactly what we mean. We can spell it out. There are these 10 points. That's what regenerative means. That's great. What does regenerative mean to Syngenta? And guess what? Syngenta's got a much, 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 much bigger microphone than those regenerative pioneers. The reason that we all hear about it isn't because they're regenerative pioneers. It's because of Syngenta and Bayer Monsanto and Pepsi and McDonald's. These are big, big players in our lives, whether we ever support them or do you buy anything from them. These companies run our world. So we ought to pay attention to what they're doing. They have all embraced the term regenerative. Essentially, every big company in the food space has. They would be, at this point, they kind of have to. Yeah, we're regenerative too, or we're going to be regenerative. But what does it mean to a company like Syngenta to be regenerative, or Pepsi? We'll take one. Syngenta just sells fertilizers and chemicals, and Pepsi just sells poison, junk food and junk food, right? Huge company. So it's wonderful. Pepsi is moving towards, a green trucking fleet to deliver junk food, right? So that can't be, in my mind, it cannot be organic, because that is not what organic is about. It's not about, there is no such thing in my mind as an organic Twinkie. Can't be. I'm not saying you should never ever eat a Twinkie. I don't think you can. I think they're out of business. But I'm not saying, okay, you should never have whatever. I'm just saying, to suggest that that's what organic is about, it is not. Is it better to make the Twinkie with organic sugar? Sure it is, because that means that sugar cane was grown in a better way if it was legitimately inspected. And that is better. But is that what we're after? No, that is not what we're after. So there is so much enthusiasm for regenerative as a term, because people, all of us, want to find a path towards salvation for our planet. And regenerative has defined itself as being the climate smart solution. Right? Climate smart is the term I believe Monsanto first came up with. So take it from there. This is, these companies are not going to make any solutions that are of great interest to me. And the USDA is giving, I think that it's now they've committed up to $13 billion to impact climate through agriculture in a positive way, in partnership with the United Arab Emirates, right? And many large industries. So they're saying we're going to spend a lot of money. They've already spent over $2 billion, or committed over $2 billion. And it was, mostly for growing corn and pork. I mean, it wasn't for changing the system. It was maybe changing how the corn is grown. But it certainly wasn't about getting rid of the fertilizers, which is a huge carbon footprint. It was not about getting rid of the CAFOs, which have a huge carbon footprint and a terrible toll on the animals and on the neighborhood, the community. So I'm not quite sure how that money's going to get spent. I hope that something good will come of it, because we do need solutions. And I won't say that Cargill could never come up with a solution. I'm just saying, I don't think they're going to come up with solutions that are opposed to their bottom line. I just don't think they're capable of it. And their bottom line is what led us to the mess that we're in. And they're going, it's like the whole junk food industry. Well, it pays. It's what people want to eat, so they say. I don't think it's that simple. But whatever, it's easy to sell. It's like drugs. Yeah, you start people on heroin, they want to keep using it, right? But that doesn't mean that a healthy society says, great, let's all just, if you want heroin, great. We're not even going to bother with it, because it's a downward spiral for everybody. It's a downward spiral for everybody. It's a little tragic, but it's not surprising that the corporations have embraced the term regenerative, because they can use it as a shield to protect what they're already doing. And they can say, we're with them. And it's an old strategy. They did it to a much smaller degree with organic. So you've got some big multinational corporations have come into organic and usually made a mess of it, in the process, and often ended up corrupting the standards or the enforcement of the standards. It's not unique to organic. It's people, and it's civilization, our culture, and it's the impact of money and low road capitalism. So the question is, is regenerative going to be our salvation? I can't imagine that it is, but I hope that it does some good. But don't get confused, because this is the claim they're making. Oh, organic is a bunch of anti-science, old Luddite hippies that is irrelevant. They wish it was irrelevant. It scares them. And these companies, Cargill, Bayer, Monsanto, Syngenta, could not possibly be organic. Just, that's not, they sell the opposite. They are what organic is the alternative to. But they think they can get away with calling what they do regenerative and buy a little love. So the good news is they realize that we, the people, want an alternative. The bad news is they're so good at confusing us that if we're not confused, we're not paying attention.
So this is a quote from Charlotte Valley's about this regenerative versus organic issue. For eaters, that's where the standard is organic's biggest strength. It's truly what makes organic unique. It has legal enforcement. From the consumer side, that's really critical. Regenerative from the consumer side doesn't work if you're in a supermarket looking for assurance when you're shopping for food. Without legal protections, regenerative and climate smart are not meaningful terms in the marketplace.
Well, that's true if the marketplace is just consumers spending their money. Regenerative and climate smart are making billions of dollars through our taxes. So we are supporting it whether we want to or not. And that's my point. The marketplace isn't limited to retail food. The marketplace is also Congress. And there's going to be a whole bunch of regenerative labels out there shortly. The market demand is too great. Everyone is like, oh, regenerative, that's what I want. I want the one that's going to save the planet. That's good. That's good that we're willing to spend our money to save the planet, that we understand there's a problem. What's bad is that there are scoundrels who are just going to lie about it.
Yeah, I think that's why we as consumers need to embrace our strength. And when I say that, I mean that I was talking with, this is many years ago, with one of the leaders of the Slow Food Organization in Italy. And he made this point that, well, people should sign petitions and they should go to, if there are, opportunities to demonstrate their support for organic or for, just the I don't want to use the word regenerative, or the health of the planet, any type of things like that. People should, be part of those things. And I said to him, are you kidding me? I mean, honestly, what power do people really have? I mean, sign a petition? What does that mean? And he said very clearly to me, and I was really struck by it. He said, politicians never lead, they only follow. And what I took out of that was, wow, we are powerful. We can affect change, but we have to do it. We have to take our power. We have that power. Most of that power is in economics. Most of it's how are we spending our dollars. So if we're informed and we make those choices to either grow our own food so we're not even buying food at the grocery store anymore, or to support farmers who are growing organic at our farmers markets, or buying real organic certified products, somebody's going to take note, including those multinationals. They'll be taking note too, because that's really the main element that they pay attention to, is how many dollars are coming through here. And so I know it's a big thing, obviously, to get consumers, because there's so many different weights that are on consumers' shoulders too, in terms of economic pressures, for example, right now with the results of inflation, for example, over the last year or so. But we can do it. We can affect this change. We have people who are committed, like farmers, who are committed to growing food in a healthy way. We have scientists and nutritionists who are busy trying to make those connections for all of us by explaining to us how the microbiome that we're creating inside ourselves is dependent on, as the soil microbiome is also dependent on us, that we're really a key fixture in that. And by making these economic choices to support the planet and our own health, we can affect change on a political basis. That's what he was saying. And I truly believe that, but you're in the trenches. I'd like us to be able to smile and to light that candle like you were talking about. Can we do that? I mean, do you see that as something that's viable?
Yeah, if you think about winning, it gets depressing in a hurry, I think. But if you think about working for something that you think is right, that gets encouraging very quickly. You get to meet wonderful people. You get to do things that are meaningful in your life. And what more can we ask for? I remember where I live, there's a woman who was a great writer and a very strong political activist named Grace Paley. And she was a fairly close neighbor of ours. And a friend asked her, Grace was always, back in the 60s and the 50s, she was doing sit-ins and protests for world peace. And a friend said, Grace, how do you keep doing this when you just keep losing over and over? And she said, well, what else am I going to do? And I think it's the right answer. What else are we going to do? I was interviewing Seth Godin once, and he said, Dave, you know, you're not going to take down Cargill. And I was like, I'm not? But of course I'm not. Of course we aren't. Of course we aren't. And but that doesn't mean that we can't create viable alternatives to Cargill, because we can, and we have before. And we are powerful. I think it's not what the Real Organic Project is about, but I do think it is important to kind of keep an eye on Congress and do our best. The laws are so powerful. I mean, how they get enforced. And so as Al Gore said, it's good to change the light bulbs. It's even more important to change the laws. And that's right. So I take a little bit of my energy and attention and work on that. Mostly I'm trying to work on the creation of a direct reality that there's nothing much more visceral than eating food. And I feed a lot of people just with my little farm, and these 1,000 farms feed a lot of people. So we're feeding 1 million people, 2 million people with what we do. And those people are healthier for it and happier for it. They appreciate it. It tastes really good. So that's good work. And to do it together, that's where I think it's very important not to be alone. It's just too depressing. You gotta find a community to share this with. And then, well, even if you don't win, it wasn't a bad life.
I think we're just going to keep at it and keep eating and enjoying the food that is the delicious food that's being created by Real Organic Project farmers. And thank you so much for the work that you do. Dave Chapman has been my guest on Great Taste. You've been listening, watching 60 Minutes of Deliciousness. I'm your host, Steve Boss. Thanks again, Dave.
Thank you, Steve.